everyone, it's Kelly Folsom here, and in today's lesson I'm going to be talking about how to describe your form through your light patterns and your shadow patterns. And to do that, we're going to be painting this simple orange. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so let's talk about how to create form on a two-dimensional surface. Okay, so the first thing that we know is that we're dealing with a three-dimensional sphere here with this simple orange. So of course the first thing that tells us about the form is that linear contour drawing. So let me get rid of this stuff for now. I don't want to go there yet. So that's one way, and usually that is the way that most of us, when we first begin, are focusing on first. We're thinking if we could just get the drawing right, get that contour right, then everything, it will look dimensional. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. So yes, you want to have the best drawing that you can possibly have, and by accurately observing that contour, that's one step in getting the form. So we'll just start first with this simple spherical-like shape, and you could probably tell already that I don't like to start out just drawing a continuous circle, because even this sphere of the orange is not like a perfectly round man-made rubber ball. It's an organic object, and so I like to look really where I like to draw in by using diagonals, which gets me thinking right away about the plane changes, the small plane changes of this object, and that's the first way that I can get form, is by doing that, than just a flat circular line, which tends to always look flat and not dimensional. So the next step that I do in any painting is to observe the shadow shape. So you want to have a specific end to your light and start to your shadow on your objects. Really look to see where they begin. In this case, this top plane, the shadow doesn't start all the way up here. It starts somewhere around here, where that starts to turn down and away from the light. But otherwise, this is kind of a top plane on the orange that continues on into space. So I start the shadow here, and then I simply want to curve the shadow to some degree with the shape of that object. So the line I'm putting in now, a lot of people would term this the core shadow, terminator edge, terminator edge for the light. There's a lot of different artistic terms that you'll learn in art schools and art lessons. And but basically it's just where the light ends, where the shadow begins. The angle of your light source really dictates this. So right now I have my light source, it's from above, and it's slightly in front of the object and to the left of the object. So that gives me a really ideal, a really traditional and ideal placement of the light, where I have, let's say, 2/3 or 3/4 of the form in light and the rest in shadow. Automatically setting yourself up in this way gives you a leg up on creating successful form in a painting. So if you go back to a lot of the old portrait paintings, you're going to see that they use this ratio a lot. So we're sort of painting a portrait of an orange today. All right, and we'll talk more about that why that is beneficial. So what I want to start to do is first just block in this shadow shape. I'm just using burnt umber, and this is toned in burnt umber. There's a little bit of phthalo blue in here, but not very much, just to kind of cut a little bit of the warmth. So the first thing I want to do is isolate these two shapes, one shape for the light, one shape for the shadow. And then, as I discussed in the live question and answer video, someone was wondering, how do you anchor something down? So the first way is to look at that cast shadow, and the darkest cast shadow is directly underneath, right where the base of that orange hits the tabletop plane. So I want to look for a shape. You're always trying to find as many distinguishable shapes as you can. And you want to maintain the integrity of those shapes throughout the painting process. And I have made this orange kind of big just so that you can, on the format, in other words, so that you can see what I'm doing better. You know, then I could kind of place the rest of the material here, just kind of get a feel for what that's going to be like for the stem. Okay, so already I have, you know, two values on the canvas. You know, one value, I'm assigning one value for my shadows and one value for my lights. I can start to bring in a third value into the background, and you know, we could talk about values a little bit more, but I think in painting you really want to keep your values as simple as possible. Two values is really the most graphic looking. However, it starts to look really, really flat. So adding a third value will give you a little bit more form. So now I'm just going to kind of go with this neutral color that I have back here in the background. I'm using raw umber cool, a little bit of Naples yellow. That's a little bit green for my taste, so I'm going to add more raw umber cool and more white, yeah, just to kind of get it neutral. Notice how I'm using my brush too whenever I'm putting this in. I'm kind of dragging the paint on. The bristles are sort of scraping the surface because I don't want to start out with super thick paint, but I also don't want just a ton of medium in this. All right, so this value that I'm putting in is still fairly related to these dark tones in the foreground, but it's just a little bit lighter. And what that helps to do is just to create more atmospheric perspective in the painting. Right now, this value against that I like. So I'm not going to put any of that in there just yet, this color. I may add something to that later on. But I like that light reversal there. So light against dark here, dark against light here. That automatically brings in some more visual interest to the picture. And you can use your brush two ways. You know, you could pull paint off with a drier brush and kind of scrape off some of that paint if you want to reveal some of this underneath. And more flat, you know, meaning parallel to the canvas, you can, you know, get sort of a smoother look and kind of take paint and drag it over. Just a couple of different ways there to use your brush. And that's one thing that we've discussed is, you know, try to stick with one or two tools and really see where those tools take you. All right, so now that I have, and I like this, but this value is just fine too for this demonstration here, just the tone for the moment. All right, so now I want to do shadow color, something that has a little more body to the pigment rather than just that burnt umber. And just to remind you, my go-to shadow color is almost always Ivory Black, Cad Red Light, Cad Yellow Deep. That does give me a really nice warm shadow that still feels like it has some richness and some color into it. And then I can just adjust that. This works for most objects, I'll say. Some objects it won't work for, but I'll just adjust that lightness, or if it's more red, I might add a little more red. If it's more green, I might add more of the Cad Yellow Deep and the black and little of the red. But in this case, it's essentially the three primaries, because I think of black as really just a dark desaturated blue. Okay. So that helps give a little bit of weight to the shadow. But what's most important is that you get your shadow shape describing the form first. And then when you put in that shadow color, you treat it pretty broadly or simply, in this case, before you start to add details and before you start to, add reflected lights or soften edges. So I want to start it off really simple. Keep it simple, sweetie. All right. And then if you do have something that's a light, definitely make sure that you try to, it's kind of a dry surface, it's not really wet and there's not a lot of dark that's on this lit edge that's going to destroy the look of the light, because whatever you paint on top is going to be affected by what's underneath. And I'm also just going to destroy that original drawing line that I was showing you, because it's a pretty dark edge and I don't want to end up with some kind of like Cezanne looking outlined object. So in painting, a lot of times you're kind of painting over the edge and then going back and reinforcing the edge again. So to start this, I'm just going to start putting in some cadmium yellow deep just as my color to start with. And look how, paint, you have to build it up. Even that cadmium yellow deep, when you first put it on, if you keep brushing it, it's going to get thinner and thinner and thinner. And that might be okay, say in the shadow or like over here next to the shadow. You could apply it thinner so that it looks duller and less lighted. And in this case, that's especially important because that creates sort of a gentle, softer turn into the shadow. And this also helps your transition zone here between light and shadow. There's like a little transition zone. And a lot of times if you already have your shadow color in, you could just barely kind of skim lightly that paint, just kind of thinly and lightly over the edge. And you see how you get sort of this murkiness to the color. So a lot of times I'm not even mixing up a color on my palette for that. I'm just using one layer of paint over another layer of paint to get that transition. Okay, so that's one of the first ways that you, after you get your shadow shape accurate to go with the form and describe the form, then you can gently transition that light into the form. Then what we want to do is first start off with a crisp enough edge on the lit side, this on the left hand side, meaning it's the lit side. We want to have enough paint there, enough coverage there, and I'm using my parallel brush technique to really lay the paint on. And as you see, I don't have any medium. I'm not pulling into the medium because I don't want to thin out the paint. I do this Cad Yellow Deep by Old Holland is super stiff, so I do pre-mix in a little touch of medium there. Okay, and then I know around that highlight, now that's my starting edge. This is the first edge that's lit up. I want to have this edge sharper and clean color. I don't want it to look murky like that, or it's going to flatten out my form. And then right here, this is where you start to observe your light pattern. Where is the climax of the light hitting this sphere? The light source is top and from above and to the left. So right about here, you know, if we were to kind of cross section this, like if we were going to do a cross contour drawing of this, almost like a basketball, right about here is where the climax of that light is. And that's the part of the form that's closest to me. It's most lit up. The highlight begins to wash out some of the local color, and of course the more reflective the object is, the more it's going to wash it out, or the more shiny, I guess, like a porcelain vase or something. Okay, so I can start to add in a little, you know, when I go lighter, I'll start to add, this cooler, lighter yellow to the mix, or even the Naples, and a small touch of white. I'm just kind of gradating the light a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter and lighter around this edge. Finesse your drawing a bit. And then the ultimate highlight, you know, with the most amount of cool. And again, it's a clean shape, okay? So you don't want to blend in your highlight too much, or you're going to lose the effect of it. Now, within that, you know, looking for that light pattern, how here it's moving up and across the form. You know, same thing here, around the form. You could take small, it's a very minute change, right? It's very subtle, to start to try to describe the form more. After we hit about here, because right about here we see that circle starts to turn under, right? So it's going to get less light. And when I put on thick paint, I still want to use my parallel brush technique, so that I don't get, you know, a lot of thick, gloppy paint. Okay, another thing that starts to bring in more form, and you can use it again with the shape of the form, with the curvature of the form, would be your reflected light. And that's going to show up in between the start of the shadow and the end of the form. Whatever you do, you don't want to lose the start of your shadow. And you know, like this stroke maybe looks a little specific, so just no paint on the brush, I might just soften that. Same thing here. So as you get closer and closer to shadow, you want most of your activity in the light, the part of the form that's closest to you. So you want to start to diminish everything, you know, whether that's getting the color a little bit murkier or less paint, the closer you get to shadow. Okay. And then I might just start pulling some tabletop plane color and light on here, just to kind of frame out that cast shadow. Just take this a little bit lighter. It's really not that much lighter. The main difference is that you're adding opaque color and opaque paint instead of the sheer paint that was down here. So anything with opacity is going to appear to be more lit up than a transparent color. Reason being is that the physical light that's hitting your canvas is going to bounce back to our eye off the painting, rather than here, a thinner transparent color, the physical light is actually somewhat passing through and there's really nothing to reflect back to us. Okay. And then, you know, just to put in a little bit of the eucalyptus leaf color. Just to bring in a little bit of that extra green and give us something else real quickly here. You know, leaves, just while we're talking about creating form, leaves are so flat, you know, they're not so three-dimensional like this. You know, they're not so full and round, and so usually they're primarily one value, and you do want some sharper edges on the edge that is most lit up or closest to you, let's say like here, and sharper edges on your cast shadow underneath. So you can really kind of slow down and carve out that sharp edge where you need it. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for today. I hope that you enjoyed the lesson. I hope it was helpful to you. And as always, post your comments or questions underneath the video or in the group. Have a great day. Bye.